My Dangerous World by Herne. Chapter 1. Uhuru. I cursed as the dollop of spray hit me full in the mouth, ruining the third cigarette in the last 5 minutes. I could sit in the cockpit for hours at a time without a drop of water coming aboard, but as soon as I lit a cigarette, this cursed dollop of sea would reduce it to a soggy mess. It made no difference whether I sat to port or starboard. That cupful of spray never missed. I decided that there were gremlins, or malignant afrits, in the Indian Ocean. The sound of my cursing roused my one and only companion. A white face appeared over the edge of the cockpit, split into a huge grin, and 85 pounds of solid bull terrier landed with a thud on my lap. I clipped a lifeline onto him, and he snuggled down to keep watch with me, though perhaps that is the wrong term, although a watchman of the highest order in port. At sea he was a scrim shanker, always sleeping on watch. Threats of floggings and huge fines made no difference. Like all bull terriers, Buller, for such is his name, had the illusion that all the world loved him, and also the mistaken idea that he was a lap dog, that ladies in expensive evening gowns would be delighted to nurse him. However, as he has the appearance of the sort of dog that eats babies for breakfast, and was always prepared to prove that he was a better man than any scrounging dock thief, no unwanted visitors ever came aboard, and I reckoned he earned his keep. It was a lovely tropical night. A full moon was coming up over the horizon, making a silver path from itself to the boat, and the sky was fading from a purplish blue to a deep blue, and a soft, warm breeze was pushing us along at about 2 knots. I know that it sounds lady novelish to say that the stars were blazing in the heavens, but the fact is that some of them do blaze, but not the famed Southern Cross. I'll defy anybody to pick it out until they have had it pointed out to them a few times. I was blissfully content, lolling there in the cockpit of the good Ch. Uhuru. Uhuru is a Swahili word meaning freedom. I had bought her from a rich playboy who had thought it would be great fun to sail round the world with a few boon companions. He had it sailed out to Mombasa for him by a firm that delivers yachts all over the world, and 3 boon companions flew out from England to join him. A navigator was engaged, and they all set out on a trial trip to get the hang of things, but were hardly out of the harbor when the 3 companions were all terribly seasick, and swore that once safely ashore, nothing would tempt them aboard again. I gathered that there was a fearful row when they got ashore, and the 3 flew back home in a pet. This left the owner crewless and friendless, and he quickly decided that he never wanted to see the beastly thing again. He put it in the hands of this pal of mine to sell, and shook the dust of Kenya from his feet. I always ascribe the fact that I bought Uhuru to iced coconut milk and gin. I was having a drink with a pal of mine, Jerry by name, and we were sitting in that gloriously bawdy pub, the Star Bar in Mombasa, watching the local ladies of the town dancing and drinking with the sailors off the boats. There had already been 2 fights, and 1 attempted knifing, and the evening was beginning to liven up. We'd both knocked round the world a bit, and the talk got round to countries, and pubs, and places we both knew. Jerry had been a sailor, whilst I a mining engineer, and my lot had taken me to many out-of-the-way places in many parts of the world. Diamonds and gold never seemed to be found in beautiful surroundings, or within easy reach of the sea, Southwest Africa excepted. From talking about where we had been, we got round to where we would like to go. Neither of us fancied the great cities of the world, sweating our guts out in cities, and eventually getting into the 5 Ulster class had definitely no appeal. I had idly remarked that I would like to go to the Seychelles Islands. They were, I had often been told, supremely beautiful. Life was lived at a very low pace, and what was more, fish were there for a shilling, and women 3 for a fish. It sounded ideal. Glorious climate, coral reefs, blue lagoons, mountains, fishing, sailing, goggling, and to top it all, the islands were held by some eggheads to be the original site of the Garden of Eden. What more could a chap want? "Look," said Jerry, "if you've a hankering to go there, why don't you buy a boat and sail there? I've got a gem of a ketch on my hands for sale, cheap. A 42-footer, fitted up in luxury, stainless steel rigging, full set of sails, echo sounder, ship-to-shore telephone, diesel engine giving 8 knots, copper sheather, gas cooker, sextants, azimuth roller reefing, built to stand up to typhoons, roller reefing, etc., etc." Now I had always thought a ketch was a sort of fishing boat, a smelly sort of thing of which one saw pictures wallowing in the troughs of dangerous-looking seas, whilst terrifically tough-looking fishermen hauled in net-loads of fishes, and the idea of owning one had never entered my head. My idea of a yacht was the kind that competed in the America Cup. Barring going a few trips in motor boats, I had never done any sailing, except once when I had gone as engineer in a small yacht which was competing in the race from Australia to New Zealand. I was there in case of emergency only, because they were not allowed to use the engine, so I acted as cook too. I do not count voyages in liners as sailing. I am not sure to this day whether it was the thoughts conjured up by my friend, just like the South Sea Islands, cheap living, no taxes, carefree life, beautiful girls, or the blissful effects of the beautifully smooth, iced coconut milk and gin. I incline to the latter, which made the idea so attractive. But the more I thought about it, the better the whole idea seemed to be. Dash it, why only the Seychelles Islands? Sumatra, Java, Bali, all those romantic-sounding places were available to me by merely, according to Jerry, hoisting a couple of sails and simply sailing there. To my surprise, I heard myself saying, "Not a bad idea. I'll give you a couple of £1,000 for it." "What?" he yelped. "Why, she cost 10 if she cost a penny. Look, you cable your friend that I'm offering £2,000 unseen, walk in, walk out, and point out that there are plenty of other boats I can buy." I was told that I would be seen in hell first, so we resumed swapping lies and the iced coconut milk and gin. As far as I was concerned, it had been one of those idle conversations one often has, such as what one would do if one won the football pools, which was why I was so surprised when a few days later Jerry rushed up to me in the bar of Mombasa Club, waving a cable and saying, "She's yours." "Who's mine?" I asked. "The Ketch, you fool. He's accepted your offer." I dimly remembered making an offer for some sort of a boat called a ketch, but I certainly never intended to buy any ruddy ketch for any sum, whatever I said. No. But you gave me specific instructions to cable him an offer of £2,000. He seemed genuinely astonished. Evidently, I had been in a large and expensive mood last Saturday night. "But it's the bargain of a lifetime," he went on. "You'd get 8,000 for it any day in England. I wish I had the money. I'd buy her myself. Do you realize that for £2,000 you're getting?" And he went into his routine about huge water tanks, patent chart table, powerful searchlight, etc., and ended up by pleading with me to take a short trip in her and do a bit of fishing for a day. He personally would take me out and show me how easy she was to handle. Now, I like fishing, and a free trip was a free trip. They charge you 35 cents an hour in Mombasa, and I agreed to go out with him the following day. At 9 o'clock the following morning, we duly arrived at the Shell Company's private pier. "There she is," he said, pointing up the creek. I looked, but could see nothing that resembled a stout fishing boat that could weather any typhoon. All I could see was a trim-looking little yacht with 2 masts, painted a gleaming white with a strip of green showing at her water line. "I still don't see it," I remarked. "Dash it, there's only one there. Look, the one with 2 masts." At that precise moment it struck me that there might be something in this ketch business. We hired a rowing boat and went aboard. The next half-hour was spent in showing me all the various gear, sextant, azimuth, and other incomprehensible instruments. Being an engineer, I was interested in the engine, charging plant, power, which, and so on. But the sails and other impedimenta left me cold. I suggested that we got on with the trip. To my surprise, the engine started up at the first touch of the self-starter. Jerry slipped her into gear for a moment, just enough to give us a push forward. The power which hoiked up the anchor, and we were off down the harbor. I think that Mombasa is the prettiest harbor I know. As you leave the mouth of the harbor, or perhaps I should say the docks, you sail past the golf links, bright green and palm-fringed, with the red roofs of the bungalows making a colorful background, past the lush Oceanic Hotel, with its swimming pool, also fringed, but this time with bikini-wearing popsies, and on your right, the small cliffs topped with palm trees, the gardens of the houses ablaze with tropical flowers. Ahead, the bluest of seas, warm and sparkling with the rollers breaking on the coral reefs, which guard each side of the harbor. One is almost overwhelmed with the brilliance of color which besets you. But back to this trip. We went a couple of miles out to sea under power, and I was told to take over the wheel, whilst Jerry hoisted the sails. I lolled at ease in the cockpit, keeping her nose into the swell. This, I thought, would be the life for me. I could go anywhere in the world I liked. If Jerry were to be believed, no taxes, no blasted government ministers talking about your duty to the state, and the penalties incurred if you failed in your duty. No power-seeking politicians to give you away, as well as the empire. No African nationalist causing thousands of little people to get killed whilst they fought for power. Judging by the fearful curses that were coming from the sail locker, all was not well below. Apparently the sails wanted sorting out. The correct ones were hidden in bags at the bottom of a huge pile of sails. This did not worry me. I was content to let the world, or at any rate the water, go by. Fishing was suggested, but I told him to get on with it and let me alone at the helm. This was bliss. We cruised around for 4 hours, and I refused to relinquish the helm until we reached the harbor mouth, when Jerry took over and we went back to our anchorage. I was a bit slow in catching the buoy, with the result that we nearly ran ashore, but managed to go astern in time, and I was able to grab it the second run. Whilst Jerry was letting the anchor out and generally fiddling about on deck, I went below and sat at the patent chart table and wrote a few words in a little blue book. I then went back and sat in the cockpit. "Well, boy, what do you think of her?" I didn't answer. I tore out a piece of paper from the little blue book and handed it to him. "Here's your 2,000 quid, I said. Chapter 2. Nightmare Journey. People who know me will be astounded that I, who never had more than a month's pay in my pocket, and that not for very long, was able to fork out a couple of £1,000. As a matter of fact, I had a very nice amount in the bank, and £2,000, though not chicken feed, didn't make much of a dent in it. I acquired it in the following manner. It's not a pretty interlude, and I will cut it as short as possible. When the Congo gained its independence and eventually blew up, I was working a diamond mine at a little place out in the blue called Mavutu. There were 5 of us whites and about 100 natives at the workings. I was the engineer, and the only Englishman there. The others, including the owner of the mine, were all Belgians. As engineer, my job was to keep the various engines running, the pumps, vibrator, etc. This was no sinecure. The owner had bought the lot at about 10th hand, I reckoned, and the wretched things were always breaking down. I have known some damn good Belgians, but that owner was the bottom. Mean as hell. He begrudged anything spent on spares, would get old ones if he could, and the natives loathed him. He was always cutting their pay for small offenses, skimping their rations, and he drove them like the devil. There was no need for him to display such meanness. The mine, though a small one, as diamond mines go, was coming on nicely, and we were getting some very good stones, as well as the usual crop of commercial ones. He must have been pulling in a good few thousand a month. We had, of course, been hearing of unrest in some parts of the province, but we all had the "it can't happen here" attitude. We were right out in the blue. The nearest town, if you can call a cluster of small shops and a few bungalows a town, was 50 miles away, and were, as we thought, isolated and far away from trouble. The first hint I had of trouble brewing was when my houseboy came to me and hinted that all was not well in the labor lines. Apparently some men had come from far away and told them that now that the Congo was independent, everything belonged to the Africans, and that they should no longer work for Europeans, but take over the mine and work for themselves. Naturally, this appealed to them, but they had some doubts if what the man said was true. He had told them that there was to be a big meeting in the town in a couple of days' time, and hinted that they had better be there. The owner was in town, but I told the other chaps, who pooh-poohed the idea, saying that there was always some rumor of trouble, but that nothing ever came of it. However, the next morning there was not a single native in camp. They had all set off to attend the meeting. Evidently something was brewing. I knew that they could not do the 50 miles each way under 4 days, and I was rather glad of a close down for 4 days, as for a long time I had wanted to take the vibrator down, and this would be a good opportunity. When therefore the next day the other chaps decided to go to town and see the fun, as they expressed it, I declined, as I wanted to finish the overhaul. It was a lucky decision on my part. I was sitting in the office about 4 o'clock the next afternoon, when Buller, my bull terrier, who had been sitting at my feet, suddenly barked. I looked up out of the window and saw Wallen, the owner, staggering up the track. He looked about all in. I stood up and went out to meet him, but he brushed past me without a word and went into the office, where I followed him. He had the safe open, and I watched him as he took out a wash leather bag containing about 6 weeks' output of diamonds and put it in his pocket. He then proceeded to stuff bundles of francs also into his pockets. All this without a word to me. "What's the hurry? "What's all this about?" I said. When he was satisfied that he had cleared the safe, he sat down at his desk and said, "Murder. That's what it is, murder. They are killing all the Europeans, men, women, and children. All the missionaries are dead, and not only Europeans. Many natives have been murdered also." "What about our chaps?" I asked. It appeared that they all were in Patel's bar having a beer, when a swarm of natives rushed in and simply carved them up. Wallen had been in the rear of the shop and managed to get out the back way, where his car was parked at the back door. He managed to drive it out of the town, getting stoned on the way, and the car had conked out about 5 miles away. He had made it on foot the rest of the way. "And now," I asked, "I will take the Jeep." Actually, it was a Land Rover, and get through to Uganda. "Right. I'll go and pack a few things, rifles and so on, and meet you at the car." "No, no," he said. "Someone must remain to guard the mine, and there is only you." "Look, Wallen," I said, "it's your mine, and if you want it guarded, stay and guard it yourself. If you don't fancy your chances, well and good. We'll both try and make it to Uganda." "I order you to stay and guard the mine," he almost screamed at me. My mind flashed back to Egypt. I had been in intelligence during the war, on the good old army principle of posting the master butcher to the bakery, when I had been ordered to do a job that was not very healthy. The chap I was taking over from had been blown but managed to get back. He had been briefing me about conditions where I was going, and I asked him if he had any more tips. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Only one more. Remember, it's better to be court-martialed than post-mortemed." That struck me as funny, and I'd always remember it. "I think I'll choose to be court-martialed," I said now. "What? You wouldn't understand. One thing, however, you can understand, and that is that I'm getting out of here, and taking you with me, unless you want to be heroic and guard your damned mine." There wasn't much he could do about it. Admittedly, it was his car, but I had the keys. I piled a few necessities, including food, into the car, and collected all the petrol I could, which was not very much, as Wallen should have brought out the week's supply. I brought my guns and the ammo, and strapped my 4.5 on. Actually, I did not expect any trouble, because the country was sparsely populated. And it was odds on that the natives to the east, where we were bound, would not have heard about the glorious news of freedom. How wrong I was. The 3 of us, the 3rd being Buller, got in, and I took over the wheel. The second bit of luck that I had that day, the route took us within 5 miles or so of the town. Then we branched off to the left. There was no real road until one got within about 100 miles of the Uganda border, and that went round the mountains of the Moon, and eventually arrived at Fort Portal in Uganda. This meant that I should have to find my way along tracks, skirting the few small towns if there were signs of trouble. However, as I said, I did not expect any. The first night we camped out in the bush. Ahead of us there was a pretty hefty forest, and I know that I should have to skirt round this somehow, as there was no road through it, at least as far as I knew, left or right. I decided to leave this decision till the morning. We were up at the first light of dawn, and after a scratch meal, biscuits, bananas, and a bottle of beer each, set off again. Actually, I had no choice regarding which way to go. To the right it was impassable, so left it had to be. We had been taking it in turns to drive, and Wallen was at the wheel. It is no fun bashing through the bush. There are so many obstacles, trees, ant-bear holes, great clumps of solid bush, occasional stream beds, and so on. One has to be on the alert all the time, and a 4-hour stint of driving in those conditions is about all that you want. About 10 o'clock we changed over, and after a mile or so came upon a fairly well-defined track, which passes for a road in that part of the country. We had gone a few more miles, keeping a sharp lookout for a village or township, because where there was a track like this, there was bound to be some sort of village, or perhaps a small township, where our reception might be friendly or hostile. Time would tell. I suppose I had driven about another mile, when ahead of me, about 300 yards, I spotted a gang of some 15 natives. They were strung across the road, and, as was usual in those parts, carried spears and bows and arrows. They might be a hunting party, or perhaps were merely traveling from one village to another. There was no question of turning off the road. There was nowhere to turn. The only thing was to drive straight on, and hope for the best. I dropped down to second gear and carried on. We got within 100 yards or so of them, and they started to signal us to stop. This I had no intention of doing. My idea was to get up to them, then tread on the gas and make a dash through them. I was watching them all the time, and not paying any attention to what Wallen was doing. We got within perhaps 40 yards, when Wallen suddenly hung out of the side, and started to blaze away with his revolver. With a yell, they dived into the bush on both sides of the road, leaving the road ahead clear. I do not think he hit any of them, judging by the way all were able to dash off. I didn't waste time finding out, but put my foot down and drove like the devil, cursing Wallen for being such a fool. The shots would undoubtedly have been heard for miles around, and we were likely to find a nice reception committee ahead. However, what had been done, and nothing now could alter that fact. It was then that Wallen started to make peculiar noises. I dare not take my eyes off the road, but I asked him what the hell was wrong with him. Instead of answering, he started to scream. It was horrible. The screams got louder and louder. I could not stand it, and pulled up. Wallen had gone down on the floor, and then I saw it. It was a small arrow sticking out of his left arm, high up near the shoulder. I knew at once what it was. One of those small poisoned arrows they use hunting game. If it was poisoned, he hadn't a hope. The best, in fact, the only way to deal with an arrow is to break off the shaft and push the head right through and draw it out the other side. However, it would have been impossible to do so in this case. I should merely have pushed it further into his shoulder, spreading the poison. Between those ghastly screams, he was trying to say something, but could only stutter something which I could not understand. Then I knew it must be poisoned, because a small wound like that would not have affected him much. I did not know what to do. I bent down and ripped his shirt and tried to ease it out. I had an idea I might be able to suck it clean, but knew it was hopeless. This poison clots the blood, and it could only be a matter of minutes before it got him. His only hope was that it might be stale, which weakens its strength. He stopped screaming and started to gasp. Long shuddering gasps. In another minute or two it was all over. He was dead. I started up again, and 1/2 mile down the road found a place to turn off. I drove steadily till I found myself amongst a lot of hills. There were no tracks here, and it seemed to be uninhabited. Obviously, I would have to bury Wallen somewhere. I got out of the car and looked around. The ground was hard and rocky, and in any case, I had nothing to dig with. I thought perhaps I could loosen the ground with a tire lever and scrape a shallow grave with my hands, but when I tried, I found the ground too rocky. Buller solved my problem. As usual, as soon as the car stopped, he had jumped out and explored the neighborhood. I had lost sight of him and called him, and he came out of a small cave a few yards away in the side of the hill. I had not noticed it, as the front was screened by bushes. Well, I could put Wallen in there and bung up the entrance with some of the many small rocks that were strewn about. It was the best I could do. It was not a pleasant job, but after 1/2 an hour it was finished. I felt sorry for him, although I had hated his guts whilst he was alive. It was a rotten way to die. He had been a lonely man. I remember him telling us that he was an orphan and had been brought up in an orphanage. As far as he knew, he had not a relative in the world. Perhaps his early life had made him into the hard, selfish man he was. I felt I ought to say something over his grave, but the only words of the burial service I could remember were, "Ashes to ashes and dust to dust," which seemed pretty inadequate. So I just said, "God rest his soul," and left him. I called Buller and was just getting into the car when I spotted a yellow bag in the road. It was the diamonds. They must have dropped out of his pocket when I dragged him out of the car. Well, he would not want them any more, and as far as I knew, they now belonged to no one, so I took them. I then remembered all the notes he had stuffed in his other pockets, but didn't fancy going and getting them. Damn it, I was not a grave robber. So I left them. I dare say that some native had been watching us, or rather me, and would come and investigate as soon as I had left, and reap a rich haul. Good luck to him if he did. I had never thought of the diamonds until I saw them in the road, but now I thought about them a good deal. They were an added incentive to get out of the Congo and into Kenya, but first I had to reach Uganda. I opened a couple of tins of bully beef and gave Buller one, and we set off again. I had emptied the last can of petrol into the tank before we started, and if I did not want to walk, I would soon have to get more petrol. The only thing to do was to find a road that ran in the right direction and hope to find a garage or a mission or something. I turned off right and drove, knowing that I would strike a road of some sort in that direction, provided I had enough fuel to reach it. I drove, musing about luck. If I had not taken the wheel back at the mine, it would have been Wallen who would have been driving that shift, and probably me who got the arrow. Again, I would not have started shooting, so perhaps neither or both of us would have got it. I didn't think that it was a lucky shot that got Wallen. Those chaps seldom miss, and certainly not from a few yards, from which he must have fired. It is extraordinary how one small action, an unconscious decision, may make the difference between life and death. I wasn't unduly upset. I had seen many men killed during the war, had killed some myself for that matter, but it had all been rather sudden and unexpected, and I suppose that I was a bit keyed up. Well, let the dead bury their dead. Late in the afternoon, I struck quite a good road, and soon after passed through a village. The inhabitants took little notice of me as I drove through, which I regarded as a good sign. Evidently the glories of freedom had not yet reached the district. Half a mile out of the place I found a garage, and pulled in. In answer to my hooting, a native appeared, and told me that the owner and his family had packed up and gone a couple of days ago. He didn't know where or why. I asked him if there was petrol in the pumps, and he said yes, but that they were locked with a padlock. A tire lever soon unlocked them, and I filled up the tank, and also the spare tins. I looked to see if I could find some more tins, but there weren't any. No doubt the absent owner had taken all he could. I asked the native if he knew why the owner had left, but he said he did not know why, but he had left after the missionaries had been killed. This gave me a bit of a jolt. I had thought that there seemed to be no trouble around here. If this were true, the sooner I went on, the better. I asked him what missionaries, and he pointed to a hill in the distance, and said the ones that had lived over there. Yes, he said, they were all killed, the men and all the women too, and some of the children. It has to do with the new government, but I am not a mission boy, so I don't know why. They had to be killed. I am not of the same tribe as the people here, he added simply. I gave him a handful of francs and pushed off. I decided that in the future I would travel at night and hide up in the bush during the day. Natives are sound sleepers, and besides are mostly frightened of ghosts at night, and few, if any, were likely to be abroad after dark. They would, in all likelihood, be asleep, or at any rate indoors when I drove through their villages. As soon as I was well clear of the village, I began to look for a likely place to hole up in, and about dusk found a nice lonely-looking spot with plenty of cover, and pulled in there for the night. For the next few days after that I hid myself away. At night I passed through quite a few villages, several of them burnt and deserted, and once I came upon a wrecked car. It had several gallons in the tank, and having no tube to siphon it out, I knocked a small hole in it, and managed to fill 2 spare tins. Every little helped. Half a mile farther on, I saw the bodies of 3 Europeans, a man and 2 women, evidently the occupants of the car. I was evidently on a major road, for it kept running dead east. Once I took a wrong fork, which petered out at a burned-out mission. Only the shell of the buildings remained, and there was no sign of any life at all. The next night I ran out of petrol. There was nothing I could do about it. From now on, as I told Buller, it was Shank's pony for us. Fortunately, we had gone through a cluster of huts about 5 miles back, and I reckoned to be a good few miles further on before anyone came across the car and started looking for the driver. There would probably be no other villages for the next 20 miles or so. I took the rifles and as many tins of bully as would go into a little native reed basket that was in the car for some unknown reason, and set off. Water I didn't have to worry about, as there are plenty of streams in the Congo. The bully was for Buller. I could easily live off fruit, and the vegetables I could scrounge from native shambas. My idea was to stick to the road and skirt any inhabited places I came across, hiding up as usual during the day. I reckoned I had between 200 and 250 miles to go, although some of the villages were signposted, giving their names. I did not know the district at all, and the names meant nothing to me. All I had to concentrate upon was going east all the time. That way I was bound to hit Uganda somewhere. I felt a bit depressed. All those miles to go was not a nice prospect in what was likely to be a hostile country all the way. Still, there was nothing else I could do. We set off. The next few days were hell. I collected a couple of huge blisters on my heels, and in the end I took my boots off and went barefoot. This was not so bad on the roads, but when I had to go off into the bush, as I had to very often, I added thorns to my blisters. At the end of the 4th day, I decided to rest up for a night and give my feet a chance to recover. I found a small stream that ran through a wood and gave them a good soaking. We spent all that night and all the next day beside the stream, and the rest did us both a lot of good. Another thing helped. Natives are great believers in the efficacies of cow dung for cuts and wounds. In the wood I found evidence of buffalo, and if cow dung, why not buffalo? I hunted around along a game track, and soon found some droppings which were fresh. I smothered my heels in the stuff. The blisters had burst long ago, and my heels were raw, and sure enough soon felt some relief. I don't doubt but that this cure goes against every hygienic principle of the gentlemen of Harley Street. But the fact is, it works. The Africans knew all about penicillin years before we did. They used to get dough that had gone moldy and scrape the mold off and smack it on cuts and wounds. I've seen them do that many times, and thought that it was just another of their silly-seeming cures that sometimes worked. It was not for many years that I connected this moldy bread with penicillin. Some of their native medicines would undoubtedly repay a study by some competent person. I forgot the number of days we walked. It seemed never-ending. I managed to scrounge food for myself, but the bully beef was soon finished, and I could find nothing for Buller. In desperation one night, I raided a native hen coop. They kicked up hell's own delight, but nobody seemed to wake up. I managed to wring the neck of 3, and Buller had a good blowout. On another occasion, we had some luck. We came upon a game trap that had a small buck in it. It did not take me long to kill and cut it up, and I risked a fire and ate the liver and some fillet. I carried off a leg for the morrow. I talked a lot to Buller. I told him that we were sort of Dick Whittington, only he was a dog, not a cat, and that we were not going to find our fortunes, but carry a damn good one with us. Looking back, I suppose that I was a bit light-headed at times, mostly from lack of decent food and being dead tired. We were going along one night when I heard the sound of a car. It seemed to be ahead. I stopped and darted into the side of the road. The noise got louder and then died away in the distance. Evidently there was another road ahead. Sure enough, about a mile further on, my road was joined by a much bigger one, obviously a main road. There was a signpost at the junction, and at the bottom of a lot of names appeared Uganda. I wondered what the mileage was. I thought that it was probably about 100, still a long way to go. At any rate, we were on the right road. I felt a bit more cheerful. We set off on this new road, when about an hour later I heard another car approaching. This time I did not duck into hiding. Friend or foe, I was going to stop that car. If foe, well, I had a 4.5, and was quite prepared to use it, and if friend, all the better. I stood in the middle of the road, with my arm up in the style adopted by the London bobbies. I was quite prepared to leap smartly to one side if it didn't stop, but I was saved this indignity. It pulled up beside me. It was crammed full with men, women, and children. They did not seem an inch to spare. At this moment another 2 cars came along the road, and I could see the lights of others in the distance. All this happened in a moment. "I say, can you give me a lift?" I asked, not very hopefully. In my anxiety, I had spoken in English, and the driver did not understand me. "Is there danger ahead?" he asked in French. I said I did not know, that I was trying to get to Uganda, and could he give me a lift? He shrugged his shoulders. "I cannot get another one in this car," he said, "but some of the others in the convoy may possibly do so." With that he started off. 3 more cars, all packed like the first, drove past me, but the 4th one stopped, much to my relief. This also was pretty full, but it looked as if they could squeeze one more in the back. I started to ask for a lift, but the driver cut me short and said, get in, you, but not the dog." This was a facer. Nothing on earth would make me abandon Buller. "Me and the dog," I said. I opened the door, and Buller shot in. He loves a car ride and will cheerfully get into anybody's car if he gets the chance. There were yelps and screams from the two women in the back seat, but I got in quickly and grabbed Buller and hugged him on my knees. I smiled in my most winning fashion and told them that he was as gentle as a dove and would be no trouble. I don't think that they believed me, but barring chucking us both out, there was not much any one of them could do. We soon settled down and caught up with the rest of the cars, of which there were 12. Apparently, they were all from Kivu and round about, and their story was one which I was to hear from practically all the other refugees. In the towns, it had not been too bad, at least few murders. These were to come later. The trouble was mostly that labor did not turn up. Lock-up shops were looted, servants stole all they could lay their hands on, and then decamped. Services such as light and water were breaking down, and life in general had become impossible. The signs were there for those who could read, and nearly all the white populations of the towns were getting out, whilst the going was good. I gathered that convoys such as this were forming all over the place, some making for Tanganyika, some Kenya or Uganda, and others making for the doubtful safety of the west coast. All had tales to tell of rape and murder on isolated farms and missions, country hotels and garages, and there seemed to be two factions of Africans fighting each other. The situation was absolutely confused. Tribal warfare seemed to be breaking out, and old scores paid off. People in Europe do not seem to understand that even in one country like the Congo, there are distinct and separate nations of Africans, all speaking a different language, having different customs and ways of life. Forest people, plain people, nomads, farming tribes, and so on. To them, and especially politicians, an African is an African, one nation and one people, whereas exactly the opposite maintains. In Kenya alone, there must be at least 50 different tribes, mostly hating each other's guts, raiding their cattle, and carrying off the young girls and women. As I write, a year after Kenya had obtained independence, the Somali tribe on the northern frontier is murdering and cattle raiding its neighbors. The Kalenjin are having a small war with the Kipsigis, and so on. It has always been so, even under British rule, and I expect will be so for many years to come. We carried on, and at 4 o'clock or so reached the border near Fort Portal. Here was a great scene of activity. Refugees had been pouring in for the last week, and the Red Cross had set up a sort of clearing station, together with the customs and immigration officials. The customs did not trouble to do anything, which was a real mercy, as most of these people had arrived with just the few treasured household goods that they could cram into a car. Everyone was anxious to get down to Mombasa and get a boat, or to Nairobi and catch a plane back to Belgium. Kenya schools were closed early and made into camps for them, and an appeal was made for French-speaking people to turn up and give a hand. It was heartening to see how good at bottom so many people were. People gave blankets, clothing, food, money, baby clothes, and generally sacrificed a lot to help. Me, I didn't want any help. Thanking my little party, I pushed off into Fort Portal in the hopes of getting a lift into Kampala. In this, I was a bit lucky. A traveler for Tusker Brewery was going there and gladly offered me a lift. We stayed the night in a pub a few miles from the town and started off early after breakfast. When it came to settling my bill, there was a bit of trouble. I only had francs, and the management was naturally rather dubious about accepting them. Neither of us knew the rate of exchange, which had dropped considerably the last few days. The bill was 50-odd shillings, mostly bar bill, and the manager was a decent chap. He suggested that I post this sum onto him as soon as I got some real money, which I did a few days later. We arrived at Kampala that evening, and I booked in at a pub. First thing next morning, I set off to find a likely-looking bullion or gem dealer. It was essential for me to get some money, and the only way I could do so was to sell a few of the stones. First of all, I bought a money belt, one of those that have a lot of separate pockets all round it. The dealer fortunately accepted my francs, and no doubt made a bit on the exchange rate. I returned to the pub and carefully sorted out the stones and put them in various pockets of the belt. There were quite a few big stones that would cut into really good gems, and hosts of medium and commercials. 2 or 3 medium ones should raise all I wanted. Fortunately, I had both a prospector's and dealer's license, so I did not anticipate any trouble. If you are caught with uncut stones and without a license, you can get up to 12 years hard labor. I had never fancied that. I did not know anyone in town, so I went round to the police and asked them if they could recommend an honest dealer. Naturally, they were more interested in seeing my licenses, but eventually recommended an Indian who they said definitely dealt in illicit diamonds, but they had not been able to catch him. He also had a buyer's license. I went round to his place and offered him 3 stones. He said yes, he would buy them, and offered me a ridiculous price for them. I said, "Look, chum, I'm a licensed dealer. Come off it, and don't arse about." I handed him my license. "If you want them, you'll pay the ruling price." After a long and annoying argument, I got 800 for 4 stones, and then I believe I was done. With 300, I bought a good second or third hand Land Rover, and the next day arrived in Kenya. An amusing incident happened at the Kenya border, at Mumias, I think the place is called. There is an imposing border post there, 2 huge stone columns with an icon bar between them across the road. I pulled up perforce, and an African came out of a sentry box at the side. He asked for my passport, which I showed him. Then he said, "I now wish to see your entry permit." I knew nothing about these permits, and told him I had not got one. Then he said, "In that case, I cannot let you through the gate. You will have to go round." and pointed to the side of the gate, where a well-worn track went round it and back onto the road again. I wish all borders were like this. I stayed a couple of nights in Nairobi, then pushed off to Mombasa, where I met the aforesaid Jerry. So that's how I came to join the bloated capitalist and have sufficient money to purchase a Huru. Chapter 3. Stocking Up. So now I had a boat, and could presumably sail to anywhere I liked. Actually, I had no doubt where I wanted to go. The Seychelles Islands, and this for a variety of reasons. Firstly, and most important, I wanted to go there. Secondly, they lay 1,000 miles due east of Mombasa. Thirdly, there are a few hundred islands and atolls scattered about in the group, and they covered a pretty large area. And as I couldn't navigate at all, I reckoned that I only had to sail slap into the rising sun, and I would be bound to hit one of them, where I could no doubt be directed to Mahe, the principal island, which was my goal. For me, then, there started a period of intense activity. I must say that I was surprised at all the formalities that one was expected to go through: registration, ship's papers of all sorts, certificates of health, seaworthiness of the craft, and 100 other things. Funny how every government regulation entails paying a fee to some government department or other, especially if one is an honest man. I am, I think, I can claim, honest with my fellow men, but I must admit I take a positive delight in contravening government regulations, especially if it saves me money. I therefore decided to get ready and push off, and to hell with their regulations. I may as well say here that I caused myself a lot of trouble through not having the right papers for immigration officials and their ilk, and advise the gentle reader to at least get the certificates, even if he manages to sail without paying for them. As I said, I now started to become extremely active. I had decided that I would provision myself with enough food to last me a year. I had read somewhere that a man in good condition eats, on the average, 4.5 pounds of food a day, allowing for the fact that I should certainly be able to restock at various ports. Should I reach one, I calculated that I should have to lay in 1,600 pounds of foodstuffs. To the caterer of the Queen Mary, this would have been child's play, but to me it was no small matter. What should I go for? Most ladies that I know are great guns on calories and proteins, especially those on a diet, as most of them seem to be, but I shouldn't know a protein if I saw one. There were those two great army essentials, bully beef and biscuits, and tinned meats of all descriptions, stewed, baked, cured, curried, and any other way. I may say I got badly stung on one item. Mother Ruleigh's mutton stew. It turned out to be a horrible gray mass of greasy gristle and fat. I sincerely recommend my readers never to accept a dinner invitation to the Ruleighs. Then there were tinned fruits, soft drinks, hard drinks, cooking fat, butter, flour, condiments, sauces, jams, preserved eggs. The list was endless. Then there was Buller to consider. He ate 2 pounds of meat daily, and a great treat last thing at night, a bar of chocolate. For about 3 weeks I walked about with a huge list to which I was constantly adding items. I used to corner people and get them to read through the list and suggest things I had forgotten. The ladies were most helpful. I should never have thought of scissors, needles, shoelaces, an electric iron, and darning wool. The last 3 never used. It may sound easy to calculate what you require for a year, but just you try it, and I'll bet you miss out a lot of items. I did. I remember that it was only at the last moment before sailing that, going below for a wash, I found I had run out of soap. Then there were all sorts of spares for the engine, spares for the boat itself, ropes, canvas, anchor, etc., and a good set of tools. Being an engineer, I am fussy about tools, and always have the best possible obtainable. The right tool for the job makes all the difference in the world between a good and a botched job. I also had some alterations made to Uhuru herself. She originally had 4 bunks, and 2 of these I pulled out and had extra fuel tanks installed. I also fitted 3 extra water tanks, each of 50-gallon capacity. I fitted an extra pump in the bilge, put a good electric light at the masthead, rewired everything, took down the engines and reassembled them, replacing any worn part, etc. In short, I did everything I could think of to ensure a trouble-free passage. Several old hands gave me tips, which I pass on to any interested party. Lay in as much whiskey as you can, bonded of course. Whiskey works wonders with officials. Being without the essential papers, I found that a bottle of good Scotch was as good, nay better, than a piece of paper with a government stamp on it. After all, officials can't drink paper, and in countries such as India, where prohibition is the rule, a couple of bottles will get you anything from a forged passport to a whole set of ship's papers. I remember telling myself that, from the day I bought Uhuru, time would mean nothing to me. Anything that was not done today could be done the next, or the day after. Nevertheless, for some unknown reason, I was in a fever to depart. Every little delay, and there were many, annoyed me beyond endurance. I was constantly chasing suppliers, who had fallen down on their promises. One of the new water tanks was faulty and leaked at the welding and had to be replaced. 3 large thermos flasks I had ordered from Nairobi arrived smashed, and the firm from whom I ordered them had no replacements, and I had to get them flown out from England. Those flasks all held 2 gallons each, and proved a godsend. When conditions were good, I would cook up a stew or something, and smack it all in the flask. Another always held coffee, and the third was a spare. It was a great comfort in rough weather to be able to have a hot meal ready and available, and I sincerely recommend to other lone-handers to get at least a couple of these large flasks. They must be really good ones. I found that mine would keep hot for about 40 hours and warm for about 60. They cost £10 each and are worth every penny. But perhaps I'm teaching my grandmother to suck eggs. Another useful tip I received was to have swan waxed vestas for matches, kept in tightly corked bottle. They never get damp and don't blow out easily. Meanwhile, I had to learn the rudiments of sailing. I was a complete novice, and had no idea how to set a sail, nor indeed their various names. Mind you, around the bars, nobody talked more about reefing, sailing close-hauled, and running gunwales under than I did. But the truth was, I was shooting a very long line. I was now berthed just off the yacht club, and thinking to remedy my ignorance of this hoisting sail business. I thought I would have a crack at hoisting one, and, as I mentally put it, see how it fixed on the mast. I duly went aboard one morning, and hauling a sail out of the locker, took it out of its bag, and proceeded to spread it out on the deck. Although I did not know it at the time, it was a Genoa, which is a very light sail, and I had barely got it spread out when a gust of wind whipped it overboard. I was only wearing a pair of khaki pants at the time, so not wishing to lose my sail, I dived after it. All might have been well if Buller had not seen me go, and immediately dived in after me. In no time at all, there was a terrible mix-up, with Buller sometimes trying to tow the sail one way, then another, then trying to rescue me, and both of us getting more and more tangled up in that accursed sail. Fortunately, we drifted and ended up entwined with the anchor chain. As all this was in full view of the rather immaculate yacht club, which, it being a Sunday, was packed with members and their guests, I gave the club a miss for the next few days, hoping the incident would be forgotten, but had no luck, and it took me a long time to live down. It was obvious that something drastic had to be done, so I came to an arrangement with Jerry to let me have one of his boys who knew a bit about sailing. Thereafter, every day we went up and down the harbor until I felt we could go outside. We did this for about 3 weeks, and I was pretty incompetent at the end of it. However, I had picked up a bit, could at least attach a sail to the mast, had learned some technical terms and names, and felt I could manage on my own. Everyone seemed so worried that I could not navigate, that at last I began to get a bit worried myself, but took comfort from the thought that I only had to go in a straight line for 1,000 miles, and also there were so many isles that I could hardly miss them. Navigation, I could study on the way over. I had bought a good book on it, and, being an engineer, I was used to calculating angles, and did not expect much trouble in working them out. There is, as Mr. Barnum said, one born every minute. I had been told that the port authorities would not let me sail unless I could comply with certain regulations, but I have never been one to worry about contravening regulations, and as I was always going out under power and then messing about with sails, practicing tacking and so on, I did not see why, when the time came, I should not go out as usual, but just keep on going and not come back. In the end, this is just what I did. It had not gone unnoticed that I had got a terrific amount of stores aboard, and I had also got some cases of whiskey aboard, out of bond, and the customs had come and sealed these cases up, and threatened me with dire penalties if I broke these seals within a 3-mile limit. In normal times, I don't suppose that I could have got away with it, but these were not normal times. Kenya was going through the throes of independence, and European officials were leaving or being dismissed left and right. This was particularly so with the police and customs and excise departments. There was an atmosphere of what the hell, I shall be out of it in a couple of months, so here you are, chum, but keep it quiet, and good luck to you. In the event, I got away with it. There was so much to do, so much to think of. I would wake in the middle of the night and think, jam, have I got jam, and have to look down my list to see if it was safely ticked off. There were all the hundreds of tens to number. I had been advised to take off all the labels and paint numbers on the tens, as labels had a bad habit of coming off and clogging up the bilge pumps. This I did, and made a list of the numbers and their contents, and nailed it up in the galley. Stores, I was told, often burst out of cupboards in heavy storms, so I got a local carpenter to fix up sliding doors and put patent fasteners on them. They have never burst open yet. Somehow the news of my projected trip had got around, and any number of people wrote to me asking to be allowed to crew, some wanting wages, some not. All were, according to themselves, healthy, willing to take any hardships, were experienced yachtsmen, novices willing to learn, brave, didn't care where they went, and ranged in ages from 16 to 60. There were also 2 girls, who were good cooks, good sports, had sailed dinghies, wouldn't grumble at hard work, and would not be a nuisance. I replied to this one, saying that while I believed that they would not be a nuisance to me, after a couple of months at sea, I might become a nuisance to them. They did not reply. Another chap advised me to have my appendix out before sailing. He said that an attack at sea would be fatal, and no matter how tough I was, nothing would save me. I risked it, without fatal results. Another Cassandra advised me to take splints, plaster of Paris, and a pair of pliers, suitable for yanking out a tooth. Failure to do so would, I gathered, very likely prove fatal. Knowledgeable chaps at the club told me tales of small boats that simply vanished, their fate never known, and they dwelt lovingly on the dangers of hidden reefs, getting run down at night. I mean, you can't keep awake all the time, old boy. Must have a sleep sometimes. And that's, of course, where the danger is. Anything can happen. I must admit I had thought of all these things, and had occasional qualms, but you can't go through life playing it safe all the time. In any case, like most people, I firmly believed that it can't happen to me, and if it did, well, we all have to go sometime. Slowly, too slowly, I was nearing the completion of my preparations. I had all my stores aboard. The engine was in tip-top condition, the charging plant running smoothly. Rigging had been renewed where necessary. She had been scraped, caulked, and painted, and there were only a few odds and ends to attend to, such as getting in fresh fruit, dog biscuits for Buller, and a harness for him, and so on. At last I could think of nothing more. As far as I could see, I was ready to go. I decided to sail on the following Monday. At long last, the great day had arrived. Everything that I could think of that needed doing had been done. I had no excuse for delay. Today I sailed. I say I had no excuse, because in spite of the tearing hurry I had been in to depart, now that all was ready, I felt a peculiar reluctance to actually start. High tide was at 5 p.m., and the great liners would be leaving the port between 4 and 6. The tide made no difference to me, of course. With my shallow draught, I could leave any time, but I had a particular reason for leaving about midday, which I thought was pretty crafty. The SS Pride of India, I think it was, or perhaps the Pride of Bombay, I forgot after all this time, was due to sail for the Seychelles Islands and India at 5 p.m., and my idea was to get out a few miles, and when the liner overhauled me, to fall in astern and line her mast up, and I reckoned that way all I had to do was to make a careful note of her course and follow it. In so doing, I imagined that I should be bang on course, and provided I followed it, which seemed easy enough, I could hardly help hitting the islands. I had kept my day of departure pretty quiet, as I was frightened that a horde of officials would descend upon me with forms and demands of all sorts, and there was only Jerry to wish me bon voyage. He was full of last-minute advice, and still apprehensive of my chances, and fussed about checking the rigging, water tanks, and gear generally. At about 11 a.m. I took Buller for a last run ashore, and picked up a couple of odds and ends of clothing. I had made a couple of pairs of canvas shorts, thinking that they were good and tough and would stand up, if that is the correct expression, to a good deal of sitting about, as I had found that if it was at all choppy, I was inclined to slide about a bit in the cockpit, and did not think that an ordinary khaki drill would stand up to much of that. In the event, I found that canvas was horribly rough, and chafed me so much that after wearing them a few hours, I chucked them overboard. We live and we learn. I got back aboard to find Jerry opening a bottle of Dimple Hog. We must, he insisted, drink to the success of the voyage. I was nothing loath. To tell the truth, I had butterflies in the tummy. What had appeared so easy a few days ago now assumed formidable proportions. Besides, Jerry's misgivings were beginning to affect me. After all, I was going against the advice of people who knew what they were talking about, and many heads had been shaken over my proposed trip. However, the die was cast. I stipulated that we should have one drink only, as I was determined to sail at midday. We duly toasted success to the trip. He toasted me. I toasted him. We both toasted Buller, and readers will not be surprised to learn that at 1:30 I helped a rather unsteady Jerry into the dinghy. I was not too steady myself. I stood on deck and watched him row ashore. Well, I thought, here we go. I went aft to start up the engine, and it suddenly struck me that he had gone ashore in my dinghy. Unless I could attract his attention, I was dinghyless. It was useless to shout. The distance was too great, and I could see him standing on the beach. Frantically I waved, only to receive an answering wave. I took off my shirt and waved. He waved back with a handkerchief. I pointed astern where the dinghy usually trailed, and made rowing motions. The penny dropped. Leaping into the dinghy, he rowed out. "Sorry," he said, "didn't think about it. So used to going ashore in it." "Why the hell didn't you send a boy out in it?" I asked. "No use," was the reply. "How would he have got back? There was nothing for it but for me to row him ashore." Back aboard once more, I lashed the dinghy amidship, where it lived. I took at last look around at the old familiar moorings, the yacht club, Jerry, the great liners moored to the busy dockside, the ferry plying between the island and the mainland, and I went aft and started the engine. "Buller," I said, "it's sail or swim now." He grinned and wagged his tail. Up with the anchor, forward with the throttle, and we started to move. We were off. The great voyage had begun.